Unfortunately, there's a bit of noise in the background. So because I'm having a bit of extension, and at the moment the people are working on the roof. They are so they are they are cutting off some of the old rudder struts and then putting in new one. I hope they can finish it this week. But anyway, today we will. The last time we looked at the Asian China, the China before history, no written words. This week, I think I will jump to Afghanistan, and then next week we'll come back to China. So let's look at the history of Afghanistan, as it is a big history. So we look all the way back to the prehistory. That means before written words. So of course we understand it by looking at the archaeological artifacts. Exaggerate the excavation of the historical sites by somebody and find quite a bit of stone implements. And there are, sorry, a bit of noise from with fermentation. No, okay, start again. From the archaeological artifacts, we know that the current day Afghanistan has already human there at least 52,000 years ago. So it's way long back. And the people in Afghanistan is the same as the Neanderthals. That means, remember last time we talked about the prehistory, the Homo species in China is Homo erectus. It's not Neanderthals, but in Afghanistan, which is just quite close to China already, they are just Neanderthals. It seems that Neanderthals haven't crossed over the mountains into China. In China, we can't find any Neanderthals evidence, but we can find the evidence up to Afghanistan. And then we also noticed that there are a lot of the upper Paleolithic places dated to 34,000 years ago. We also have a lot of evidence that farming started quite early. It is among one of the earliest in the world. Artifacts indicate that the indigenous people were small farmers and herdsmen, very probably grouped into tribes with small local kingdoms rising and falling through the ages. Early inhabitants around 3000 BCE, so that's about 5,000 years ago, were likely to have been connected through culture and trade to laboring civilizations, including obviously the Indus Valley civilizations. Now, Afghanistan has been influenced a lot from Europe and Middle East. Urban civilization may have begun as early as 5,000 years ago. And it's possible that the early city of some Mandaka, whatever, okay, was a colony of nearby Indus Valley civilization. The first known people were Indo-Iranians, but their dates of arrival has been estimated widely from as early as 5,000 years ago to 3,500 years ago. The region of Afghanistan is in this region. This is the Afghanistan region. So the Afghanistan is a archaeological complex referring to as Bactria Magnicana. So this complex was initially discovered by a Russian archaeologist, and it has been dated to around 2,000 250 to 1700 BC. So that is again pretty old. This site was again a Soviet archaeologist, and the name comes from the Greek names. From his excavation, reveals numerous monumental structures in many sites, and they are fortified by impressive walls and gates. Unfortunately, most of the reports are confined to Soviet journals, and then later on they rediscover it. For example, there are evidence of a settlement in a well-watered northern foothill of a particular area in the Neolithic period. That means they already started farming. In this region, we have mud bricks during the early food producing era from about 9,000 years and 6,000 years ago. So it's quite early. It's one of the early area places where humans settled down. I suppose because Afghanistan is very hilly and there's a lot of valleys. Typically, the valleys will be very fertile, and I think that is the reason why people will settle down there, because the land is pretty fertile. But the other issue is because there are so many mountains there, each of the valleys is probably will be isolated from the other people from in the other valleys. Even if they have contact, they will take quite a bit of time climbing over the whole mountain to reach the other group. This is some of the artifacts discovered. I think it's very beautiful and artistic. Very impressive, isn't it? So we are talking about this whole region here. Today's Afghanistan is around this region, so it's approximately the same area what we are talking about. But this is another artifact. Obviously, this is pottery, and is looking at it, you understand it is quite artistic. Another one, pottery. This is bronze. Now, in terms of Afghanistan, there is a very important minerals produced by Afghanistan is tin. You want to make bronze, you need about 90% copper, 10% tin. And tin is mostly available in Afghanistan, in the whole region of Middle East. So in that sense, Afghanistan is a very important region in the old world. So let's have a brief overview.
Afghanistan, a nation of 37 million people, has one of the fastest growing populations on the planet and will soon be more populous than either Canada or Poland. It is bordered by Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Afghanistan is located at the strategic crossroads that has connected Iranian, Central, and East Asian civilizations to India. It is one of the most mountainous countries in the world. However, it is also home to a vast network of rivers and fertile valleys, carved out by the massive snowmelt flowing from the Hindu Kush and other mountain ranges which envelop the country. More than 4,000 years ago, the farmers of this region began to urbanize. Little is known about these first ancient city-states, other than that those in the north, in the land that became known as Bactria, were culturally connected to Central Asian peoples, while those in the southeast were heavily influenced by the Indus Valley civilization, with some of the cities there likely being founded by colonists from the south. However, until more archaeological work is done, Afghanistan's ancient past will remain largely mysterious. Even Kabul, the current capital of Afghanistan, is likely to have been near continuously inhabited for more than 3,500 years, with the exact origin and people who built it unknown. Sometime during the 7th century BC, the Medes, a northern Iranian people, were the first to conquer and unite this land under their rule, which lasted approximately a little over a century. They were overthrown by the closely related Achaemenid Persians, who divided the empire up into satrapies, or provinces. By the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great, Persian people, language, culture, and religion were prevalent in what is now Afghanistan, with sizable Buddhist and Greek minorities who the Persians had resettled from their western provinces in the preceding centuries. Alexander faced some of the most formidable resistance of his conquests in Bactria, which is likely the primary reason he married the Bactrian princess Roxana, with whom he had a son, also named Alexander, which secured the allegiance of much of the Bactrian nobility and people, and access to India through the strategically important Khyber Pass. Alexander also founded several Greek colonies in the region that later became important political, commercial, and military centers. The Macedonian general Seleucus and his descendants ruled over much of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire in the years following his death at the age of 32. Control over Bactria, the Indus River Valley, was tenuous at best. Before 300 BC, much of this territory had been lost to the Indian Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta. In the peace that followed the war between the two empires, Chandragupta married Seleucus's daughter and gifted his father-in-law 500 trained war elephants, which he used to great effect in his wars in the west. Not long after, the Greek cities of Bactria overthrew Seleucid rule, establishing a wealthy kingdom that controlled much of the land trade to and from China and India. They were able to withstand a major Seleucid invasion and a nearly 3-year-long siege of their capital city of Balkh, causing the exhausted Seleucids to sue for peace. Over the next 2 decades, the Seleucid Empire was also greatly weakened by the rise of another one of their former vassals, the Arsacid Parthians. In the southeast, the Mauryan Empire collapsed. The Greco-Bactrians were then able to effectively fill much of the power vacuum left by these two empires, but their success was halted by internal division. As much of the army was in India, expanding Greco-Bactrian territory, the king was overthrown by a usurper, splitting the empire into 2 kingdoms, which both experienced several decades of relative stability and prosperity, and the flourishing of a culture that was a unique amalgamation of Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other Central Asian cultures. After the Greco-Bactrians suffered a series of severe military defeats by the Parthians, they were overrun by successive waves of nomadic invaders. The most powerful of these tribal confederations were the Uz and the Saka, or Scythians, who established control over the lower Indus Valley. The Uz settled in Bactria and largely assimilated with the local people over time. After the waves of nomadic invasions calmed down to some extent, the Parthians then conquered much of the east, up until the Indus River. The Parthian Arsacid dynasty was very hands-off in their style of governance, and were content as long as taxes were paid and men supplied to the army when needed. And as they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian noble family that had defeated the Scythians and had seized control over the Indus River seceded from the empire, establishing the Suren kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian kingdom. And although they ceased to pay taxes, and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian great king, the 2 states appear to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Uz tribes formed the Kushan kingdom and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians, and then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders, and even without, with Buddhist merchants and missionaries traveling to Han China, which many believe were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world. Manufactured goods from as far away as China, Rome, and Aksumite Ethiopia would have been common sights in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting, which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them. Viewing themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled, the reinvigorated Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire, and established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory, and were gradually stripped of their military and administrative power. During the intermediate period of Sasanian decline, the nomadic Keturites and then Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire, and like the Uz before them, they largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the Sasanians. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire, and is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan. By the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates, Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land that proved difficult to control. Whenever a large Arab army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent, wealthy city-state, controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India, ruled over by Buddhists and Hindus. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safavid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule, that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Safavids were ruled by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians, and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. They made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which in time overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty. Based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan, they continued the policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which allowed for their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam and were possibly of Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal in the east. However, after Ghiyath al-Din's death, the empire fell into infighting and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Khorasan, both of Turkic Mamluk origin. Only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate, Khorasan was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the region. The Il Khanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol royal family and army. And as the Il Khanate fragmented into many small states, the Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before. Timur frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century following Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal strife and civil war, with its territory being lost to the Uzbeks in the north, the Safavid Persians in the west, and in the southeast, the emergent Mughal Empire, which would go on to conquer most of India, claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan. Throughout the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotek dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering a great deal of Iranian territory. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the soldier of fortune Nader Shah. He was the son of a common herdsman and one of the most brilliant military strategists ever to have lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated Ottoman and Mughal armies, but his reign was brought short when he was assassinated at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a Pashtun tribal confederation selected him as their leader. He used his military experience to great effect, conquering those cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. And during his long 25-year reign, he successfully campaigned in India 3 times against the Marathas and Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. The Tehrani Empire is considered the foundation of the modern state of Afghanistan, and Ahmad Shah Durrani as the father of the nation. The empire declined after they were defeated by the Sikhs and driven out of the Indian subcontinent. However, the greatest factor influencing their decline may have been economic, as trade was cut off to China due to poor diplomatic relations, and the traffic along the ancient land trade routes connecting India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia and the dominance of the British East India Company over maritime trade, leaving Afghanistan in a more isolated state than it had been in over 2,000 years, but also a more unified one, with the majority of the country practicing the same religion, Sunni Islam, and the concept of a national Afghan identity became prevalent, regardless of tribal or ethnic affiliation. The Durrani were overthrown by Dost Muhammad Khan, who established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British, who had largely gained control over India and its revenue, feared that the Russians would take Afghanistan and use it as a staging ground to take India from them. So to preempt the Russians, they invaded instead and reinstalled the deposed Tehrani king on the throne, who was widely disliked. After encountering minimal resistance to their conquest and occupation of the country, the British withdrew most of their troops back to India. The remaining British occupying force was then ambushed and was almost completely slaughtered as they attempted to retreat from the country. In an event that shocked Great Britain and the Western world, the Afghans then reinstated Dost Muhammad Khan on the throne of the country. Nearly 4 decades after the first invasion, the British invaded again. A peace was concluded after both sides suffered heavy casualties. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, with the Afghans maintaining complete self-rule and the British handling their foreign affairs, which they didn't do too much of anyways. Namely, no canoodling with the Ruskies. 40 years later, in a third Anglo-Afghan war, 120,000 Afghans invaded India. After a few brief clashes with the British, a treaty was made where Afghanistan would be internationally recognized as a fully independent state. A few years later, in 1926, the country was reformed into the Kingdom of Afghanistan and began the process of modernization and increased contacts with the outside world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown in a bloodless coup d'etat by the king's cousin, Mohammed Daoud Khan, who became the president of a single-party republic, who further sought to modernize the country and received aid from the Soviet Union and the United States, who both tried to curry influence over the country. In 1978, Daoud and many of his family members were assassinated during a communist coup d'etat, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This Soviet-backed government pushed wide-ranging reforms that sought to modernize and abolish most traditional and religious societal structures. This caused widespread insurrection and Soviet involvement in a long war of attrition that nearly lasted 10 years and caused millions of refugees to leave the country. A few years after the Soviet Union withdrew their forces, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and took over the cities, which was largely overthrown by the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in 1996, which established a totalitarian rule. They were removed from power 5 years later by U.S. coalition forces and the Northern Alliance, and established the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. Let me know in the comments of what you believe the future holds for Afghanistan. Also, let me know in the comments of what you found most interesting about Afghan history. This has been Epimetheus.
Wow.
Wow.
Well,
That means Afghanistan has always been in war. One summary, it is because its strategic importance between the trade of China and Europe. So it has been conquered, we don't know how many times. Okay, and then we come to the latest, the Afghanistan War with America. So looking back before 2001, September 11, we know that the joint US and British invasion in late 2001 was preceded by 2 decades of war with all kinds of different things, including the Soviet. And at that time, the Americans want to overthrow the Soviet, and therefore they help to establish the Al-Qaeda, the Mujahideen, etc. And obviously there's another force which becomes today's Taliban. Sorry, I have to answer the door. Okay, sorry. They want us to clear the kitchen for removal of a skylight. Why don't they tell us earlier? Yeah, anyway. So the United States has provided a lot of military equipment to the Mujahideen in order to oust the Soviet-backed Afghanistan government to establish a transition government. So the Soviet to left, they entered into Afghanistan in 1979 and left in 1989. The Mujahideen actually is politically very fragmented. As among themselves, there are some fights. The Taliban emerged in about 1996 and seized Kabul, the capital, and therefore has been ruling the Afghanistan for a couple of years. Then September 11 come, and the Americans want Taliban to capture Osama bin Laden and then send Osama bin Laden to America. The Al-Qaeda, Taliban disagree, and therefore it caused the invasion. Okay, it's the hijacking of 4 American airlines on September 11, 2001. So suddenly Afghanistan becomes the focus of the world. At that time, the US President George W. Bush formulated a strategy to oust the Taliban from Afghanistan in order to dismantle Al-Qaeda. At the same time, they were also thinking of attacking Iraq. But anyway, and we are not talking about Iraq at this time. So the actual campaign to invade Afghanistan started on September 26. So it's pretty fast, 2 weeks. In 2 weeks' time, the Americans are now invading Afghanistan. So there's a lot of conspiracy theory saying that the United States Army has already made a full plan to invade Afghanistan before September 11. They are using the September 11 as an excuse, and therefore they want to get in. The CIA team joined forces with the Northern Resistance. At that time, Taliban occupy Afghanistan, cannot control the northern region. So there's a northern resistance there against the Taliban. So enemy's enemy is a friend. So Americans cooperated with the Northern Alliance in order to defeat the Taliban. But the Northern Alliance itself is a loosely connected groups of warlords. So they are not exactly one unit. But anyway, with the superior firepower, Taliban retreated. And this is a picture of the US Special Forces working with the Northern Alliance taken in 2001 November. And even Taliban's spiritual home fell on December the 6th. That start the end of the Taliban. So because of the very superior nuclear military force, American with its allies is easy to overrun and then drive the Taliban into the rural areas. And then the war changes from a hot war into guerrilla war. With the ouster of the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, the international force now shifted focus to reconstruction and nation building. Unfortunately, I think the Americans and the allies doesn't have a sufficient understanding of the culture of Afghanistan. And therefore, this whole nation building effort is wasted. More than half of the money went to training and equipping the Afghanistan security forces, and the remainder represent a fractional amount that experts said would be required to develop a country which is consistently ranked near the bottom of the global human development indexes. Now, another interesting thing is, before Taliban take control, I will call it Taliban 1.0. Okay? Today is Taliban 2.0. During Taliban 1.0, they use a very strict Islamic law, and women are confined at home, do not allow to go out. If they want to go out, they must be accompanied by a man relatives. And girls are not going to school, etc., etc. But today, it looks like to me, Taliban 2.0 is much more moderate. It remains to be seen whether they are more moderate or not. But at least what they had telling the world is that they will be much more moderate. But again, we can only judge it by what they do later on. The Americans spent about $1 trillion in the war effort in Afghanistan, and it takes them 20 years. Now, between 2001 and 2009, just over 38 billion go into Afghanistan, appropriated by the US Congress. So out of $1 trillion, there is 1,000 billion. Only 338. So when they talk about nation building, they are not actually really spending the money to build the nation. They are more of forming a very corrupt government and then trying to train the Afghan security forces. Now, from the history, we know that Afghanistan has been in war most of the time. And therefore, I think it is a bit lucrative to say they don't know how to fight. Of course, they are not fighting using your weapons, not using your tactics. But obviously, I think the Afghanistan warriors are very well suited to its own territory. But anyway, let's go on. Despite military commitments from dozens of US allies, the United States initially argued against allowing other foreign forces to deploy beyond the Kabul area. The choice was directed by the Pentagon, which insisted on a light footprint out of the concern of Afghanistan would become a drag on US resources as attention shifted to Iraq. We know that the Americans invaded Iraq shortly after their invasion in Afghanistan. So, but this so-called light footprint lasted 20 years, the longest war of the American. The US States consistently represented the largest foreign force in Afghanistan, and it bore the heaviest losses. By spring 2010, more than 1,000 US troops has been killed in Afghanistan, while the British troops suffer about 300, and the Canadians some 150. I think our Australian troops doesn't suffer as much. I think it's in the tens, less than 100.
40, I think.
But yeah, something like that. Yeah. Okay. And on May the 1st, 2003, U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced an end to the major combat and say, okay, we won. Okay. At that time, there were 8,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and the first democratic Afghan elections since the fourth Taliban was held on 2004, October the 9th, with approximately 80% of registered voters turning out to give Karzai a full 5-year term as president. Parliamentary elections were staged a year later, with dozens of women claiming seats set aside for them to ensure gender diversity. And then there's a constitution as well, and trying to create a powerful central government and weak regional and local authorities. A structure was in opposition to the country's long-standing traditions. And that's where I think the American fell politically. So George W. Bush take a seat on a two-seat fighter plane, landed on a aircraft carrier, and pronounced at the end of the Afghanistan War. And this is a picture he took with all the sailors on that warship. And this is the first Afghanistan's president, Ahmed Karzai. Despite vast powers under the constitution, Karzai was widely regarded as a weak leader who grew increasingly isolated as the war progressed. He survived several assassinations, including a rocket attack on 2004 September. So, and security concerns keep him largely confined to the presidential palace. The government was also beset by corruption, and effort to build a national army and police force were troubled from the start by inadequate international support and ethnic differences between Afghanistans. Now, as I mentioned before, Afghanistan is full of hills and valleys, and each valley is almost, you can look at it as a tribe. So it is a tribal society. You want to unite the tribal society under a central government. It is very, very difficult. And that's where I think the Americans designed the system wrong. And the Taliban resurgence. So after the Taliban being defeated, they retract into the mountains, and I will go back to a problem when United Kingdom left India. Remember, before the Second World War, India, including the area which today called Pakistan, is a colony of the United Kingdom. As the United Kingdom left and allowed the independence of India, the infighting between the Muslims and the Hindus caused a large migration among the previously people living together. So under the British rule, you may have the Muslim next door, I may be Hindu, and then the other side Hindu, and they have mixed all together. But before the United Kingdom left India, a tension between the Muslim and Hindus start to develop because they want to fight to form the government. And this untrust among the Muslim and the Hindus caused the formation of Pakistan. So Pakistan, at that time, there were two Pakistan, the East Pakistan and the current Pakistan. Of course, today's the East Pakistan becomes the Bangladesh, and the Pakistan is Pakistan. The West Pakistan is now Pakistan. Now, when the land bar at the border of the Pakistan is drawn, it is actually drawn across a very large tribal group of Afghanistan, right in the middle. That provided with the Taliban a very good hiding place. During the fighting season, which is the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, the Taliban will move into different cities and attack the Afghanistan government. And then after attack, of course, they will be responded by a very powerful weaponry. So they will retreat. When they retreat back, they can retreat across the Afghanistan and Pakistan border into Pakistan. And then there, they regroup, reform, and then make another conquer a team, and then go back into Afghanistan and then attack again. This kind of things lasted for the rest of the US occupation of Afghanistan. It is one of the most difficult situations to handle with. You have a insurgent where is sympathetic by the local people. The tribal groups actually will give hiding place to Taliban. And then when the force really come, then they can go across the border into Pakistan. And then they can reform there, because that region was just arbitrarily drawn by the British when they left. And there are hundreds of crossings between these two areas. So the locals know how to go from one area to the other area, but your invading forces might not. And therefore, it caused a lot of problem. So these are information about all kinds of attack in 2005, 2006, 2007, etc., etc. This go on and on and on. For the commanders on the ground in Afghanistan, it's apparent that the Taliban intended to escalate its campaign, launching more frequent attacks and intensify its fundraising from wealthy individuals and groups in the Persian Gulf. Of course, the Taliban, being a Muslim, get the Muslim countries' support. And then now, here from the Wikipedia, they say the international pressure has forced Taliban to poppy cultivation during their final year in power. But after their removal, the opium industry make a comeback. Now, Taliban 1.0, in their last year, 2001, the acreage of opium farming dropped practically to zero, almost none. But after Taliban was defeated, the American come in, the acreage for planting opium increased to historical figures, much higher than any time before. The peak is 2017. The 2017 is the peak, and then we have 2018 being second highest cultivating area. 2019 starting to drop, 2020 dropped to almost zero, and 2021 rise up again. But Taliban 2.0 say they are going to stop opium cultivation. The United States, meanwhile, had only limited success in killing or capturing Taliban commanders, because, as I said, the commanders can easily retract back, and they also had the sympathy of the local people. So, and then they can always go back to the Pakistan. By 2009, the U.S. President Barack Obama want to withdraw from Pakistan, from Afghanistan. In order to withdraw, he want to establish a stronger hold first, so that he can retreat safely. So increased the number of troops there to the. He said additional 17,000 U.S. troops on top of 36,000, and then there's another 32 NATO service members there. And then, because of the domestic politics, Obama took a rare step of removing the commanding general from the theater of war. That is wrong, simply wrong. You cannot change the commanding officer while a war is fighting. Otherwise, you will lose the war. Anyway. And then, assuming command by another general, he doesn't have enough troops to execute the new strategy. And therefore, it requires more and more. So the American is now realizing that they have been in Afghanistan too long, and the war, although they established a government using the constitution they draw up, but obviously it is not going well. And then one of the quite how can I say? Okay, let me explain what I want to say first. Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize when he was elected, but Obama increased the drone strikes in Pakistan and Afghanistan by a large margin, about 3 times as much as the previous government. But anyway, I don't know how he deserved a Peace Prize. He visited Afghanistan first time in 2010. And he told Karzai, you need to clean up the corruption. Of course not. How can he do that? Okay. He said he will, but no sign, few signs in short term they have done anything. Because again, the culture there is not possible to run a lean government, a clean government, difficult. Okay. So, and then he started to attempt to start the reconciliation with Taliban. When you can't deal with your enemy, the next step you do is negotiate with the enemy in order to make you rule the country a little bit better. So Taliban is now on one side still attacking, on the other side starting to do political negotiations. The military structure in Afghanistan have a change when it replaced the general, and this put everything out of order. I think by this time, the failure of American expedition in this Afghanistan is now ensured. Okay, a little bit of this and that, and one of the most important is again WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks it released a number of paper which we call the Afghan War Diary, and later on there's another group. It's called the Afghanistan War Papers. In these papers, the people on the ground in Afghanistan is already know that they are failing. They are not winning the war. But these messages, when they go up to the very top, the American highest government is still saying, we are winning, we are Afghanistan under control, etc. So I don't know whether it is the media or is the government trying to put up a bright image, or is that a delusion? I don't know. So this is a massive leak of secret files exposed through Afghan war by Julian Assange. And then by 2011, a special force in American killed Osama bin Laden. And therefore, the Americans say, oh, our objectives are achieved. We want to remove bin Laden, and then bin Laden is dead. So Obama announced a accelerated timetable for withdrawal, and then started the withdrawal. So
the last American troops cleared out of Bagram Air Base without celebrations or fanfare. The U.S. military, citing security concerns, is not saying when or how U.S. troops are leaving. Bases are shutting down without hardly a peep. At the White House, President Biden also did not want to draw attention to Afghanistan, bristling when reporters pressed him today about the impact of the withdrawal.
Are you worried that the Afghan government might fall?
I think they have the capacity to be able to sustain the government.
Your thought on Afghanistan.
I want to talk about happy things, man.
Afghanistan.
I'm not going to answer any more question on Afghanistan. Look, it's 4th of July.
But not talking about it won't stop this. As U.S. troops leave, some Afghan security units are collapsing. The Taliban's propaganda channels, in confirmed events, show Afghan police and soldiers giving up their bases and their weapons. The Taliban have even been handing out pocket money to pay for their transport home. Humiliation. Most Afghans do not want the Taliban to return. Zaman Ahmadi is studying to be a computer engineer. He taught himself English, listening to Voice of America radio.
All Afghanistan going to be the same as before. No education, no freedom, there's no TV, there's no any broadcast, anything.
2,442 Americans died in this war. But for years, it's mainly been a training mission to prop up the Afghan security services. By September, nearly all U.S. troops will be gone. And it's the Taliban who are now celebrating as Americans leave in silence. Thousands of Afghan
stop. That is on July the 3rd. Yes, and then we know what happened next. Huh? Okay, so a lot of these people will die because they will fall from the plane. So anyway, with that, we come to Taliban 2.0. what will happen next, we don't know. We have only have to watch. But the American withdrawal, a lot of people say it is the Saigon withdrawal 2.0. Remember in 1975, yeah, when Americans withdraw from Vietnam, they used helicopters to lift the American officials off the roof of the embassy. And the same thing happened in Kabul not too long ago. So a lot of US political commenters say the Biden made a very big mistake in withdrawing during the fighting season. The last time the Soviet they withdraw in January during the winter months when the Taliban were not coming out in force because it's not a fighting season. The weather is not good enough for them to travel. Basically, they are locked into their camp. But this time, the American choose to withdraw before September 11. I think that is symbolic. But that withdrawal timetable also means the Taliban can go out in full. Another interesting we observe is a lot of the government security forces just give up without a fight. So we see now, although we in the West heard all about all the bad things the Taliban had done and will do, but I think Taliban actually has the support of the local people. They have because the Afghanistan has been transformed into a Muslim country centuries ago. So it is a Muslim country. And Taliban, the word itself means a student of Islam. So Taliban 2.0 have been doing quite a number of things correct in the sense that they know how to defeat the Americans. What the challenge for them is now how do they govern Afghanistan? We don't know. So we have only to observe what will happen next. But the American withdrawal looks very shameful to a lot of people outside of Afghanistan. It's a defeat. It's not a victory retreat, put it that way. Okay.
Anybody been watching the ABC one, hosted by Tony Jones? It's
Yes.
called something like After 9/11 or something like that. It's very good.
After the Towers.
After the Towers, it could be that.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I will have a look and then
Have a look on iView. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, and then we will see some of you in China today.
Thank you, Albert.
Bye.
Bye.
Very much.
Bye.